The book of Judges reads like a fuse burning in the dark. It starts with victory songs still echoing from the days of Joshua, and ends with a line that punches through centuries. No king, no order, everyone doing what felt right to them. Between those 2 points, the ground shakes. Under 16 leaders, spectacular rescues, scandalous vows, and a repeated pattern ancient writers refuse to sanitize. End. Sin. Surrender to enemies. Cry for help. Deliverance. Brief. Peace. Then the spiral again. Faster. Uglier. Louder. It opens after Joshua's funeral, somewhere in the late 13th to early 12th century BCE, in a land still full of fortified cities and iron chariots, sacred groves, and rival kings. The tribes ask the Lord who goes up first. Judah goes. Simeon tags along. Canaanites are pushed back in some hills, but their iron chariots dominate the plains. One powerful king named Adoni-Bezek loses thumbs and great toes, an act not invented by the Bible but echoing ancient Near Eastern eye for an eye. Justice. He admits it is fitting, not as a heroic confession, but a grim mirror of what he had exacted on other rulers. That tone sets the stage. Israel wins. Israel compromises. Israel makes covenants it was commanded to avoid. Altars to foreign gods remain standing, like unburied bones. At Bochim, weeping, a messenger of the Lord stands and announces what everyone already senses in their nerves. You did not break the altars. You did make covenants with the inhabitants. You will live with the thorns you refuse to pull. From the start, the book refuses to pretend the slide is accidental. It states it simply. Israel embraced the gods of the surrounding nations. Israel forgot. Now the cycle begins to spin. Kushan Rishathaim, literally double wickedness, rules from the region of Aram Naharaim, Mesopotamia, and Israel serves him 8 years. Then the first judge rises, Othniel, the nephew and son-in-law of Caleb, the same Caleb who silenced crowds in the wilderness and said the land could be taken. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon Othniel. He defeats the Mesopotamian king. The land rests for 40 years. That is the template, pristine and clean. It will not stay clean for long. Moab rises next. Eglon of Moab forms an alliance with Ammon and Amalek, takes the city of palms, Jericho, and holds Israel for 18 years. Then Ehud, a Benjaminite, whose left hand becomes a surprise weapon in a right-handed world, crafts a double-edged dagger, a cubit long, and hides it on his right thigh, where guards do not expect it. He gets an audience with Eglon in a cool upper room, and leaves silently while confusion spreads through the palace. Eglon's servants think their king is relieving himself, and delay. Ehud rallies Israel in the hills of Ephraim, seizes the fords of the Jordan, and cuts off Moab's retreat. 10,000 perish, called strong and able. An 80-year peace stretches out, the longest rest in the book, while an almost throwaway line mentions a man named Shamgar, son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. The text spares no words for him, but his presence signals an emerging threat on the coast. Philistia is here now, and its shadow will lengthen to the end of Judges and into Samuel. The spotlight shifts to the north. Jabin, king of Canaan, ruling from Hazor, deploys the technology Israel fears. 900 iron chariots, commanded by Sisera. For 20 years he crushes the hill tribes. A prophetess named Deborah sits under a date palm between Ramah and Bethel, her court under the sky, her authority clear, her words accepted across tribes. She calls Barak from Kadesh Naphtali and orders him to mount 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zebulun and draw Sisera toward the Wadi Kishon. Barak insists she accompany him. She agrees, but announces the honor will go to a woman. Storm front. The chariots sink. The Kishon overflows. The battlefield becomes mud and terror. Sisera abandons his chariot and flees on foot to the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite, who has peace with Jabin. Jael welcomes him. He sleeps. She drives a tent peg through his temple. The text celebrates in song, in Judges 5, one of the oldest poetic pieces in the Hebrew Bible. The stars from their courses, the torrent of Kishon, the curse on Meroz for staying home, the wistful mother of Sisera imagining plunder and embroidered garments while her son lies dead in a tent. 40 years of peace follow, but in the song's final line the cracks widen. Those who love the Lord are likened to the sunrise. Everyone else ends like Sisera. So far the pattern holds, but tenderness begins to die out of the land. Now Midian arrives like locusts. For 7 years, raiders swarm, destroy crops, steal animals. Israel hides in caves and clefts. At Ophrah, an angelic messenger sits under a terebinth and opens a future for a man threshing wheat in a winepress. Gideon of the Abiezrites tears down his father's Baal altar at night, commissions a new altar to the Lord, and wakes up the town's fury. Joash, Gideon's father, rebukes the mob with a line both sarcastic and theological. If Baal is a god, let him contend for himself. Gideon is renamed Jerubbaal. Let Baal contend. A taunt that will reverberate through the narrative. The numbers swell and then shrink. 32,000 men gather at the spring of Herod, facing the Midianite camp by the hill of Moreh. The Lord calls the army too big. Cowards, go home. 22,000 leave. 10,000 remain. Still too many. Gideon chooses 300 based on the way they drink water, a debated test that nonetheless obeys a single point. The rescue will be beyond credit to human strength. With jars, torches, and trumpets, Gideon divides the 300 into 3 companies, surrounds the camp at night, breaks the jars, lifts the torches, blasts the horns, and shouts a cry that sends panic through the enemy lines. Midianites turn their swords on each other. The rest flee across the Jordan. Gideon calls Ephraim to seize the fords, and they capture and kill 2 princes, Oreb and Zeb, names meaning raven and wolf, at rocks that will be named for them. Gideon crosses the Jordan in hot pursuit of 2 kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. Succoth and Penuel refuse to give bread to the famished 300. When the kings are captured, Gideon returns and disciplines the towns, tears flesh with thorns and briars, tears down a tower. He then executes Zebah and Zalmunna for killing his brothers, a personal act of justice, and refuses kingship with the right words. The Lord shall rule over you. Then he makes an ephod from the gold of the spoil and places it in Ophrah. The ephod becomes a snare, a religious object that pulls people into idolatry. The land has rest for 40 years. Gideon dies with 70 sons, and a son by a concubine in Shechem named Abimelech. My father is king. Begins to plot. Abimelech is not a judge. Afterward is the warning. Is the warning. He goes to Shechem, his mother's town, and plays the blood card. He kills his 70 brothers on one stone, a ritual execution calculated to terrify. One escapes. Jotham. From Mount Gerizim, Jotham tells a parable about trees looking for a king. Olive, fig, and vine decline the offer. The bramble says yes, and promises shade it cannot provide, then threatens fire on the cedars of Lebanon. The crowd listens. Then they crown Abimelech near the oak of Shechem. It takes 3 years for everything to blow apart. God sends an evil spirit between Abimelech and Shechem's leaders. Treachery meets treachery. Zeal for idolatry and zeal for survival collide in alleys and gates. Abimelech razes Shechem, salts it, and burns a tower full of men and women. At the Bez, another tower stands. A woman drops an upper millstone from the roof. It fractures Abimelech's skull. He commands his armor-bearer to finish him, so that no one will say a woman killed him. The text says it anyway. Justice lands like a final, echoing thud. Abimelech's ambition becomes a cautionary signal flare against monarchy without God's reign. Minor judges arrive almost as pauses between storms. Tola of Issachar rises to save Israel and judges 23 years. Jair the Gileadite judges 22 years and fathers 30 sons who ride 30 donkeys and control 30 towns called Havoth Jair, tent villages of Jair. These notes are not trivia. They signal prosperity, order, and disguised danger. Donkey mounts in that time function as a symbol of status and peace. The public record of sons and towns signals power consolidated in family networks. Exactly the environment primed for new failure. Then the collapse deepens. Israel serves the Baals and Ashtaroth and the gods of Aram, Sidon, Moab, the Ammonites and the Philistines. 7 foreign sets of gods listed to match 7 nations, as if to say the apostasy is complete. The Lord announces refusal to rescue and refuses lip service repentance. Israel throws away idols and serves the Lord anyway. The text records that his soul grew impatient over the misery of Israel. This is the moment the Lord's compassion and Israel's stubbornness cross paths again. Across the Jordan, Ammon oppresses Gilead 18 years and pushes west into Judah, Benjamin, and Ephraim. Jephthah the Gileadite rises next, a warrior son of a prostitute, driven from his father's home by his half-brothers, gathering to himself worthless men, a term that usually signals mercenary muscle. The elders of Gilead, now frightened, ask him to command. He accepts, but only with authority. He sends a diplomatic message to the king of Ammon, recounting Israel's journey from Egypt. Israel did not take the land of Moab and Ammon, he says, but only Sihon's territory, because Sihon attacked. Israel has held the disputed land 300 years. Why demand it now? The Ammonite king ignores the reasoning. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon Jephthah. He makes a vow. If the Lord gives victory, whoever comes out of his house to meet him will be the Lord's, and he will offer it up. He defeats Ammon with a sweeping blow, striking 20 cities from Aroer toward Minnith and Abel-Keramim. Victory at a price. Jephthah returns. His only child, a daughter, comes out with timbrels and dances. The silence inside that scene breaks hearts across centuries. He tells her the vow. She asks for 2 months in the hills to weep her virginity. Then he fulfills his vow. The text does not explain how. Commentators argue fiercely. Some hold it was a burnt offering, an abomination condemned elsewhere. Others suggest she was dedicated to lifelong service and perpetual virginity, a living sacrifice without offspring, a crushing end to Jephthah's line. The narrative leaves it stark. There is no celebration. Jephthah judges 6 years and dies, his legacy marked by 1 victory, 1 vow, and a civil war. Ephraim appears again with the same anger poured on Gideon earlier. Why were they not summoned to battle? With Gideon, diplomacy saved the day. With Jephthah, it does not. Ephraim insults Gilead. Combat explodes at the fords of the Jordan. Refugees are tested with a single word, shibboleth, grain, stream. Their dialect drops the shish. Gileadites hear Sibboleth and know their enemies. 42,000 Ephraimites die. The book refuses to edit these civil ruptures out of the sacred story. Tribal pride stains the water red and makes God's people kill each other over pronunciation at the river's edge. 3 more judges quickly pass the stage. Ibzan of Bethlehem judges 7 years, fathers 30 sons, and sends out 30 daughters in marriage, while bringing in 30 brides for his sons from outside. Alliances woven like a net. Elon of Zebulun judges 10 years. Abdon, son of Hillel, judges 8, with 40 sons and 30 grandsons riding 70 donkey colts. A parade of prestige implying stability. Then the text turns to the last and most famous judge, the one whose story burns brightest and most conflicted. Samson's story begins before his birth. A nameless woman in Zorah cannot have children. The angel of the Lord appears, announces a Nazirite child consecrated from the womb. No razor, no wine, no contact with the dead. Manoah, her husband, interacts with the messenger, and only at the moment of offering on a rock, when flame rises, and the angel ascends in the flame, do they realize who they entertain. Awe replaces questions. Rejoicing replaces fear. A boy is born named Samson, little son, carrying in his name both hope and a warning. The Philistines dominate Israel for 40 years. Samson does not end that domination. He begins the deliverance and dies in the middle of it. Everything about Samson is paradox. He is a Nazirite who touches carcasses. He is a judge who acts like a one-man rebellion. He burns Philistine fields not with an organized army, but by tying torches to 300 foxes in pairs. A logistical feat that says as much about his wilderness craft as his rage. He kills a lion bare-handed, finds a hive in the carcass later, and crafts a riddle from the incident for 30 Philistine men at his wedding feast in Timnah. They extract the answer by pressuring his wife under threat. He pays the wager with 30 garments taken from 30 Philistines at Ashkelon. He storms away from his own wedding, returns later, and finds his wife given to another. The spiral now runs personal. Philistines burn his former wife and her father. Samson strikes back hip and thigh, a Hebrew idiom for ferocious injury. They bind him with 2 new ropes and hand him over at Lehi. The Spirit of the Lord supplies power. The ropes melt like flax in fire. He picks up a fresh donkey's jawbone and strikes down 1,000. He thirsts and prays. God splits a hollow place and water flows out. A Nazirite touches a carcass and drinks a miraculous spring. Strength and mercy refuse to fit neat moral equations. He visits a prostitute in Gaza and at midnight tears up city gates, massive, iron, heavy, and carries them to the hill opposite Hebron. He falls in love with Delilah in the valley of Sorek. The Philistine lords promise silver if she uncovers the secret of his strength. 3 times he deceives her with cords, with new ropes, with braids woven into a loom. Finally he yields. A razor will release his Nazirite hair and the consecration it signifies. While he sleeps, she removes the hair with a man's razor. The Philistines gouge out his eyes, bind him with bronze shackles, and set him to grinding grain in prison, the cruel reversal of a man who once tore the gates off a city. His hair begins to grow again. At a festival to Dagon, 3,000 gather on a roof to celebrate his capture. They parade him between pillars in the temple. He leans on the pillars and calls on God for strength. He pushes. The temple collapses. The dead he kills at his death outnumber those he killed in life. His family takes his body, buries him between Zorah and Eshtaol. He judged Israel 20 years. He never united tribes. He never reformed worship. He struck devastating blows against a giant foe and left a story that exposes how thin the line runs between consecration and compromise. Judges could have ended there, disordered rescues piling up to a messy climax with Samson. But the book is not finished. 2 appendices unravel the social fabric with a force that lingers. They are not sequels. They are snapshots of the time when there was no king. They unfold without a named judge. They watch religion corrode and justice implode. The first begins with a man named Micah in the hill country of Ephraim, stealing silver from his mother, confessing and returning it. She sanctifies some of it to make an idol. Micah establishes a private shrine, crafts an ephod and household gods, and installs one of his sons as priest. When a young Levite from Bethlehem, later identified as Jonathan son of Gershom, a name tied in manuscripts to Moses with a raised nun to avoid the scandal, comes by, Micah hires him. He declares that God will be good to him, Because he has a Levite as priest. The logic is impeccable and poisonous. Formal structure replaces obedience. Private worship becomes a substitute for covenant faith. Then the tribe of Dan appears. Their allotted territory near the Philistines remains under pressure. They seek new land. Spies find Laish in the far north, a quiet city secure and distant, ruled by no overlord and unsuspecting. On the way back, they stop at Micah's house and recognize the Levite's voice. He recognizes them. They recognize an opportunity. 600 Danite warriors return, take Micah's carved image, ephod, teraphim, and worship kit, and persuade the Levite to come with them. After all, being priest to a tribe is greater than being priest to a man. Micah runs after them and protests, a man with everything that mattered to him in a backpack moving away. The Danites threaten him and walk on. They destroy Laish, rebuild it, and name it Dan. They set up the graven image and install Jonathan and his sons as priests until the day of captivity of the land. When the text mentions a graven image in Dan for generations, it anticipates the golden calf cult Jeroboam I will later build there in 1 Kings. The corruption is already on a shelf waiting. The second appendix is one of the darkest narratives in Scripture. A Levite from the hill country of Ephraim takes a concubine from Bethlehem. She leaves him and returns to her father's house. He goes to speak to her heart, stays several days with her father, and then sets out. They pass Jebus, Jerusalem, where the Levite refuses to lodge among foreigners, and presses on to Gibeah in Benjamin. At the square, no one offers hospitality until an old man from the fields invites them in. That night, men of the city surround the house and demand to violate the Levite. The host pleads in a way that echoes Sodom. The situation devolves into horror. The Levite pushes out his concubine. She is abused and dies at the door. At daybreak, he speaks to her lifeless body, lifts her onto a donkey, and returns home. He divides her body into 12 pieces and sends them throughout Israel. The message conveys what words cannot. All Israel gathers at Mizpah as one man, 400,000 foot soldiers, and swears an oath. No one will give a daughter in marriage to Benjamin. They demand the men of Gibeah be handed over. Benjamin refuses. Civil war ignites. Israel inquires of the Lord and goes up against Benjamin. The first day Benjamin cuts down 22,000. The second day, Benjamin kills 18,000. On the third day, Israel sets an ambush, feigns retreat, and draws Benjamin out. Smoke rises from Gibeah as the ambush takes the city. Benjamin turns to see their home in conflagration and loses heart. 25,000 are cut down. 600 men flee to the rock of Rimmon and hide 4 months. Suddenly, the victors face the vow they made. An entire tribe stands on the brink of extinction, with no wives to continue the line. The assembly realizes one city, Jabesh Gilead, failed to join the national gathering. They send 12,000 warriors to strike it with the edge of the sword, but spare 400 virgins, bringing them to Shiloh for the 600 Benjaminite survivors. This still leaves 200 men without wives. The elders craft a solution that juggles their vow with mercy and bends the law into a pretzel. They instruct the Benjaminites to lie in wait during the annual festival at Shiloh, where young women dance in vineyards and seize wives from the dancers. They reassure the fathers and brothers of the abducted women that they did not break their vow, since they did not technically give their daughters. It is legalism laid atop trauma. Benjamin rebuilds. The book ends with the phrase that has haunted every scene. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. Here is the pattern that ties everything together with one iron thread. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon flawed deliverers and saves a people who repeatedly pivot to other gods. The heroes get smaller as the stakes get higher. Othniel leads a clean story. Ehud kills an oppressor and triggers 80 years of peace, but uses deception at the edge of assassination. Deborah and Barak trust but argue about honor, while an outsider, Jael, drives the decisive nail. Gideon destroys Baal and then builds an ephod that becomes a snare. Abimelech declares himself king over blood and dies by a woman's millstone. Jephthah defends Israel with a vow that kills his legacy and slaughters Ephraim at a river crossing over a word. Samson devastates Philistines with private vendettas and finishes a national deliverance by dying under the ruins of an idol's temple. The north sets up an idol at Dan with a priestly line that claims Moses as grandfather, while the south tears itself apart over violence in a Benjamite town, then robs a city and a festival to keep one tribe alive. The refrain is not hyperbole. The absence of a righteous king is not a political statement, but a spiritual X-ray. Now watch the numbers and titles, because Judges measures moral decline with a ruler as precise as a scalpel. 6 major judges stand out: Othniel, Ehud, Deborah with Barak, Gideon, Jephthah, Samson. 6 minor judges appear in between: Shamgar, Tola, Jair, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon. A defaced king, Abimelech, sits in the middle like a counterfeit coin, stamped with violence. 12 judges echo the 12 tribes, a deliberate literary symmetry, as if the book is arranging a tribal calendar of rescues while counting down to a national heart attack. The years of oppression and rest lengthen and multiply. 8 years, 18 years, 20 years, 7 years, 18 years, 40 years, and stack into a few centuries. Scholars argue about the timeline because some judges rule contemporaneously in different regions. That fits the chaos. Israel lives as a federation of tribes with regional leaders rising as needed. There is no centralized government, no unified army, no national shrine widely honored. Shiloh houses the tabernacle in the hill country of Ephraim, and yet altars rise under trees everywhere, making worship private property and justice a local negotiation. The geography matters. The Jordan's fords, the Jezreel Valley, the ridges of Ephraim, the Philistine coastal plain, the northern city of Hazor, and the northernmost Dan. Every map line becomes a character in the story. The controversies are not detours. They are the veins of the book. Ehud's assassination sits at the edge of moral justifiability. In ancient warcraft, slaying an oppressor's king is not murder in the same sense we define it today. It is a decisive strike in a state of war. But the scene's quietness, a locked upper room, the servants delayed by shame, the dagger disappearing into flesh, all of it rubs against any neat definition of holy war. Deborah leads as a prophetess and judge in a patriarchal world, without apology or footnote, while Barak's dependence on her presence reveals that courage and leadership can be shared without resentment of God's choice. Jael's act violates hospitality in the most lethal way, yet the song calls her most blessed among women in tents. The ethics of wartime hospitality in the ancient Near East are thorny, and Judges places the thorn in the foreground without calling it a flower. Gideon's selection method for the 300, a water-drinking test, has spawned sermons on alert lappers versus careless kneelers, but the text never moralizes the posture. It underscores God's insistence on being the decisive factor. Gideon's ephod shines as a sobering afterscene. Even a hero can build an idol with gold won in holy victory. Abimelech's kingship warns that monarchy can be an idol as surely as a statue. Jephthah's vow sits under scholarly Klieg lights year after year, and the text refuses to explain itself. The word used for burnt offering is the ordinary term, yet the context rails against human sacrifice as abomination. Some suggest sanctuary service for women, pointing to later texts that mention women serving at the tabernacle entrance. Others argue that the horror is precisely the point. A judge whose theology parroted pagan vows destroyed his own future. The narrative leaves you standing outside the tent, with silence on every side. Samson's paradoxical Nazirite status has become a classroom case study in consecration. Number 6 outlines Nazirites. No wine or vinegar, no grape products, no haircuts, no contact with death, male or female, for a specified period. Samson's vow is from the womb, unique in duration. He violates at least 2 conditions in story terms: touching the dead, possibly drinking at feasts in Philistine towns, and yet the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him repeatedly. The book offers no loopholes. It offers a picture of mercy outpacing disobedience for a mission God refuses to abandon, and a picture of consequences landing regardless. Samson's strength is not hair magic, but consecration sign. Hair as tangible pledge of a gift he did not earn and could not keep apart from faithfulness. The final scene at Dagon's temple proves it. In his prayer, the source of strength stands clear. He rests his hands on the pillars and asks God to remember him. The hair has begun to grow back. The covenant symbol returns as the covenant Lord answers in power. Philistia reels. Israel does not suddenly reform. The judges deliver, but cannot resurrect hearts. The appendices add historical texture that explodes the convenient myth of non-stop faithfulness around the tabernacle. Micah's idol and the Danite migration likely occur early in the period when the tribe of Dan still seeks land, showing that syncretism started almost immediately. Laish, later known as Dan, sits at the headwaters of the Jordan, with fertile land and weak defenses. Exactly the kind of city an inland tribe would target when hemmed in by Philistines. Archaeologists identify Tel Dan as the site, with layers reflecting changes in control over centuries. When the book says Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Manasseh, served as priest, a scribal tradition lifts the Hebrew letter Nun above the line in Manasseh, a visual signal that an original reading likely read Moses. But the scribes recoiled from shaming Moses by linking his name to idolatry. The text restrains itself while testifying to how close spiritual failure came to foundational names. The story of the Levite's concubine and the civil war around Gibeah tips forward into the birth of Israel's monarchy. Gibeah later becomes King Saul's home base, when the book ends by declaring there was no king, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. It does not simply pine for political centralization. It lays the rails towards Samuel's warnings about kings in 1 Samuel 8, and the people's insistence anyway. The ache for a good king is not a betrayal of God, but a confession that leadership matters. The problem the book refuses to blunt is that even good human kings fail. Gideon's refusal and Abimelech's usurpation, side by side, show that desire for a king can be both noble and deadly. Another rhythm in Judges is the repeated phrase, "The Spirit of the Lord came upon a judge." It lands on Othniel, on Gideon, on Jephthah, and rushes mightily upon Samson. The Spirit empowers for rescue and does not fix character by remote control. That theology matters. The book refuses to equate spiritual gifting with spiritual maturity. Strength falls, vows fail, courage collapses, but the mission continues. This underscores a deeper want threaded through the chaos: the need for someone who can rescue and rule without moral collapse. It whispers toward a pattern that later becomes explicit in the prophets: a righteous ruler, a shepherd king, a deliverer whose spirit rests on him without measure, who judges not by sight or hearing, but with righteousness. Judges never says his name. It makes the hunger. Geography keeps playing its role. Kishon's floodplain becomes a chariot trap. The spring at Harud becomes a recruiting and reduction site. The fords of Jordan become checkpoints where words betray tribal identity. The rock of Oreb and the winepress of Zeb become memorial to panic and defeat. Penuel's tower becomes an object lesson in arrogance punished. Ophrah houses a homemade ephod that seduces a nation. Shiloh hosts a festival that turns into a marriage market by ambush. Dan's northern shrine becomes a rival sanctuary that will later split the nation's heart. Gaza's gates, torn up and carried to a hill, signal humiliation to the Philistine Pentapolis. The geography is not background. It is narrative theology in rock and water and gate. Time flows irregularly. The book itself acknowledges overlapping events. The Philistine oppression of 40 years overlaps the Ammonite oppression. Samson's 20-year judgeship overlaps Eli's priesthood and the early stirrings that will lead to Samuel. Shamgar's ox-goad feet either overlaps Ehud or bridges to Deborah. The editors of Judges do not try to compress it into a single linear timeline. They spin a collage and dare you to stare. The book's artistry deserves attention. It opens with Judah's initial victories and compromise, moves through a cycle of sin servitude, supplication salvation, and then inverts into a world where judges fail as often as they succeed. Stories mirror each other. A woman intent drives a stake through a foreign general's head. A woman in a tower drops a stone through a local tyrant's skull. A father renames his son Jerubbaal to taunt a false god. A man from Ephraim named Micah hires a Levite to legitimize a carved image. A vow brings victory and tragedy in Jephthah. A vow of consecration brings victory and tragedy in Samson. A festival at Shiloh becomes a source of joyless solutions. A song of Deborah becomes a rare shaft of glory. The songs themselves bookend the major cycles. Deborah's song celebrates victory and curses cowardice. Samson's story ends with a silent collapse, and the more eloquent song in his arc belongs to the Philistines at Dagon's temple, cut off mid-chorus by falling stone. Judges demands a response. It refuses neat heroes, while refusing cynicism. Gideon at night, with a smashed altar and a bull's blood running, tells you courage can break a generation's idol. Jael with a tent peg tells you outsiders can become instruments of the Lord. Deborah under the palm tells you God will raise leaders wherever he pleases, and honor for their faithfulness stands in Scripture forever. Ehud with a dagger strapped to the right thigh in a right-handed world tells you God's deliverance arrives through unexpected strengths and vulnerable moments. Othniel's clean 40 reminds you that sometimes faithfulness actually looks like peace and quiet. Shamgar's ox-goad tells you 28 inches of sharpened wood can become a weapon in the hands of a farmer, and a miracle in the hands of God. Jephthah's vow tells you zeal without knowledge can burn down inheritance. Samson's ruin tells you strength without surrender is a loaded gate you carry, but never open. Judges also teaches how idolatry operates. It rarely looks like a single decisive betrayal. It looks like syncretism. Yahweh and the Lord plus something else. A shrine in Dan with a Levite of Moses' line. An ephod in Ophrah made with gold from holy war. A vow in Gilead modeled after the bargains pagans make with their gods. Jerubbaal's house full of sons replaced by Abimelech's swagger at Shechem. A philanthropy of piety that funds private worship while ignoring covenant law. The text's repetition of again about Israel's evil functions, like a metronome of drift. Again Israel did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Again he gave them into enemy hands. Again he raised a deliverer. Again the land had rest. Again they forgot. The refrain about no king invites a final caution. Later kings will not automatically fix the pattern. Saul will traffic in rash vows and disobedience that echo Jephthah and Gideon's mistakes. David will carry victories with warrior skill and poetry, and then fall into a moral abyss that reverberates in his family. The king Israel needs must unite the gifts of judges, courage, empowerment by the Spirit, strategic wisdom, and add what none of them possessed in full: faithful obedience that does not turn to idols, justice that does not bow to tribalism, mercy that does not rewrite vows to avoid hard repentance. The New Testament will claim that king in Jesus, but Judges lays down the silhouette centuries earlier, without yet speaking his name. It simply stakes the claim that without a righteous king, Everyone will do what is right in their own eyes, and the nation will stagger from crisis to crisis, strange rescues and preventable tragedies all the way down. Here, then, is the complete story like it is often not seen. Obsessively concrete, theologically charged, rigorously honest. Judges teaches with storm and songs and bones and gates and ashes. The angel's words at Bokeem reverberate at the end of the book, as if the messenger's voice never left the hills. You did not tear down the altars. You will live with the thorns you refused to pull. Yet the story refuses to collapse into despair. The Lord grows impatient over the misery of his people and acts again and again. The Spirit comes upon weak people and makes them strong for moments that change history. The land itself remembers. Rocks take names of fallen princes. Springs open for the thirsty. Altars rise and fall. Gates move. Pillars crack. Songs survive. The Book of Judges never asks permission to tell the truth. It shows people as they are, and God as He is. Unyielding in holiness, unrelenting in mercy, unsettling in methods, unstoppable in purpose. It sets human failure beside divine faithfulness until the contrast blazes. It escorts the reader to the border of monarchy, while warning about idols of government and power with equal heat. It refuses to let a viewer settle for heroes who can only win battles without changing hearts. It lets the tension hang. A righteous king needed, a kingdom not yet. The story ends with the words that summarize every scene you watched unfold. No king. Our eyes as judges. Altars still standing where they should be ash. The pages turn, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of a prophet grows louder. The echo remains, insistent as the Kishon River in flood. There is a king who can bring rest that lasts. The Book of Judges teaches what the land looks like until he comes.